Welcome to EBMUD's Water Wednesday speaker series. This is a monthly series where we discuss various topics regarding water. Tonight, we'll be providing a drought update, where we are now and what's next. My name is Laura Luong, EBMUD Community Affairs Representative, and I'll be the facilitator tonight. We have a great presentation followed by Q&A. Guests are muted. We have so if you have any questions at any time during the presentation, you can use the Q&A button and ask your question. And you can do that anytime during the presentation, but we'll answer them after the presentation. This meeting is being recorded and will be posted to our YouTube channel and our website at ebmud.com/waterwednesday. I'm going to start off by saying yesterday was a big day at EBMUD. EBMUD Board of Directors declared a stage 2 drought. Around this time last year, we declared a stage 1 drought. What does that all mean? Well, we'll get into that very soon. We have a great panel of experts lined up tonight. They are Roberto Cortez, Manager of Water Supply, Alice Toohey, Manager of Water Conservation, and Mike Tagliarini, Director of Water and Natural Resources. Let's get started. Roberto.
Okay, thank you. Let's see. Laura, are you going to advance the presentation? There you go. Okay. Good evening, everyone. So I'm going to start today's session by introducing a little bit of the EBMUD water system, which really starts over 90 miles away from Oakland, our Oakland headquarters, on the watershed of the Macaumie River on the western part of the Sierra. So this darker blue here is generally considered the watershed that collects water into the tributaries, eventually into Pardee Reservoir. A little hard to see, but get the idea. Pardee Reservoir, which is located right here, is our main water supply reservoir, and is filled primarily by the rain and the snow that falls on the mountains on the higher elevations of the watershed. This reservoir ends up providing about 90% of the water supply for our customers and is a key asset for us. Water that collects in Pardee Reservoir is delivered to the East Bay through 3 large diameter pipelines, which are referred to as the Macaumie Aqueducts. And that's that line essentially that's shown here that generates from Pardee Reservoir and traverses the delta in the pink area, eventually ending up in the East Bay. The 3 pipelines end up delivering water supplying water to the 3 inline plants that are located in Walnut Creek, Lafayette, and Orinda, and also help supply the local storage reservoirs that we have in the East Bay, Upper San Leandro, San Pablo, and Briones reservoirs. Also shown on this map is our supplemental water supply system, which is our Freeport Regional Water Project. And that's up there. This system allows us to take water from the Sacramento River, which starts right at the beginning here, and diverts that water from the Sacramento River to connections that we have made on the Macaumie Aqueducts, shown by this line where it intersects the Macaumie Aqueducts just south of Comanche Reservoir. That Sacramento River water eventually flows down to our two primary storage reservoirs, the Upper San Leandro Reservoir and the San Pablo Reservoir. That's just a little overview of the water system. Where are we in terms of water supply? Next slide, please. The amount of rain and snow that we receive in the Macaumie watershed affects how much water collects at Pardee Reservoir. What you see in this graph is the amount of rain that we received in the Macaumie watershed compared to the average amounts for that particular month. As you can see in the blue lines in October and December, those were really wet months. We received a lot of water in those particular months. And in fact, October was the wettest month on record, and December was way above average. But then we didn't get that much. January through March are the driest 3 months on record. So we went from looking good in October, a little dry in November, and then being really wet in December, but then it dried things dried up. Last week, we did receive a little bit of rain. And in fact, April, although not illustrated here, because this information is through April 19th, we ended up with more than 4 inches of rain, which is above average. So that's a good thing. But overall, through the end of the last week, although not shown here, we received about 37 inches in total so far in our watershed in the Macaumie, which is 84% of average. Next slide, please. This graph represents the precipitation that we received in the East Bay. And this is important because our terminal reservoirs, our storage reservoirs in the East Bay, do provide about 10% of the water supply to our customers. And those reservoirs depend only on the local rain and runoff that we receive. And again, October, really wet, December, really wet, but then January, February, March, really dry. Again, we did receive a little rain last week, which bumped up the totals to about 20.9 inches or 82% of average. Next slide, please. This graph represents the snowpack in our Macaumie watershed, which eventually melts into the Pardee Reservoir. The orange dotted line that you see represents historical average. This line is important because at this time of the year, on average, we would still have about 60 inches of snow underground up in our watershed. And that continues to melt through June. But the red line that you see represents the snowpack of this year. And we did get a little bit of snow in October. December and early January were very, very good. But then again, January, February, and March, hardly any. And that snow melt started really early in the year. And even though we got about 14 inches of snow last week, all that snow is pretty much gone now. And that's unfortunate because it's only April and we don't have any snow in our watershed that really impacts how much water we receive into Pardee Reservoir. What does that mean? Next slide, please. That means that because of the lower than average rainfall and the lower than average snowpack, we cannot and will not be able to refill our reservoirs completely. We are tracking a dry hydrology, and we expect to end up with about 465,000 acre feet in our reservoirs. Now that number changed a little bit as of early this week, and that's because, like I mentioned earlier, this data is reflected through April 19th. And because we did receive some extra rain and some extra snow last week, towards the end of the week, the actual projected storage at the end of September is closer to 480,000 acre feet based on a hydrology. A full system is 625,000 acre feet. So you could see that because of our lower than average rainfall and our lower than average snowpack, we will not be able to get to a full system this year. Next slide, please. Now, I mentioned a little bit about the water system. I'm going to hand it over now to Alice Toohey, who will talk a little bit more about the actions our board of directors took yesterday to address our water supplies.
Thanks so much, Roberto. And thank you everyone for joining us on a Wednesday evening. So my name's Alice Toohey. I'm the manager of water conservation. So as Roberto said, I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the actions our board took last night. And then I'm also going to talk about the role that you can play and that we hope you'll play to help us meet our goals and conserve water. So yesterday was a big day for our board. In light of the water shortage conditions that Roberto mentioned and the hydrology, our board took a number of actions. You can see this chart here. This image is taken from our water shortage contingency plan. So that specifies at different levels of drought, what things we do in terms of asking for conservation and looking for supplemental supplies. So we had been in a stage 1 drought, but given the kind of worsening conditions statewide, our board chose to go to a stage 2 drought. And that included asking for 10% mandatory district-wide water use reductions. Now, one thing I want to be clear about there, because I know it's always a little bit confusing, that doesn't mean we're asking every single customer to reduce their water use by 10% compared to 2020, because we know everybody's in a different place. Some people are already being really efficient. So this is a district-wide goal. So if you're somebody who's already being really careful with your water use, really efficient, thank you, keep up the good work, but you don't have to worry about trying to cut back 10%. What we're doing instead is we have some restrictions in place and some programs that we think will help us get to that 10% collectively as a community. And the first of those is the Excessive Use Penalty Ordinance, and the second is Section 28 of our regulations, which sets some restrictions on water use. So let's start by talking about Section 28. Next slide, please. So Section 28 lists some prohibitions on the use of potable water that, again, are meant to help us get to that 10% collective savings. And I want to stress that these are really, a lot of them, common sense measures. We're not really asking for anything that we think is too difficult or that's going to really have a negative effect on people's landscaping. A lot of them have to do with irrigation because we know that that's where we can get a lot of water savings. So on the irrigation side, we are asking everyone to not irrigate more than 3 times per week. Even in the hottest part of our service area, that should be enough to keep lawns and other plants alive. We're asking that folks only irrigate before 9 a.m. and after 6 p.m. And that's, again, to prevent evaporation and water waste. Similarly, we're asking that people not irrigate within 48 hours of measurable rainfall. So if we do get a late spring rain event, we ask that you remember to go out and turn off your irrigation system. And lastly, no irrigation that causes runoff. You don't need to water the pavement. So other restrictions, no filling decorative fountains or pools that don't recirculate. We're asking folks not to use a hose to sort of wash down sidewalks and driveways. You can use a broom instead. If you need to use a pot of water to scrub things, that's fine, but we're asking people not to kind of hose those off. If you're washing your car, please make sure that you got a shut-off nozzle on the hose. And then for our commercial customers, we're asking restaurants, cafes, bars to only provide water upon request. And hotels should ask their patrons if they want their linens and towels washed daily. So again, we think these are relatively common sense measures. Next slide, please. So one of the other things our board did yesterday was affirm the enaction of our Excessive Use Penalty Ordinance. So EBMUD is required by state law to have some kind of system to discourage excessive water use during droughts. And what we're really focusing on here is what's called sort of discretionary water use, which a lot of it is irrigation, like you can see in this picture right here. So this penalty ordinance applies to single-family residential customers, and it sets thresholds at different stages of drought. So for a stage 2 drought, like we're in right now, that threshold is 66 units per month, which works out to be about 1,646 gallons of water per day for a household. And that is a lot of water. So this is a pretty generous threshold. This is a pretty generous allowance, and that's given that we're in a stage 2. If folks do exceed that threshold, they'll get a warning. Upon the second exceedance, they would be fined $2 per unit above that threshold. And I want to let you know, we are also going to be doing really proactive outreach to customers who have high water use to let them know about this ordinance. And we think that outreach in and of itself will be an effective conservation tool to help bring down that excessive use. Next slide, please. So how can you help us get to 10%? And we hope that you will. We really appreciate all the support from our customers. There's 3 basic things that we're asking all our customers to do, and this is across all customer classes. This is throughout our service area. And I'm going to talk about each of these in a little more detail. First, we're asking people to irrigate efficiently. Second, find and fix leaks. And third, be mindful of indoor use. So let's talk about irrigating efficiently. Next slide. So as I mentioned, we're asking people not to water their turf more than 3 times per week. I should specify that if you have things like shrubs and trees, often those do better if you irrigate them less often, but a little more deeply. So you can think about irrigating shrubs and trees 1 day per week. Again, we're asking that you water at dusk and dawn to avoid evaporation. I want to point out here, we have a lot of tools on our website. If you go to ebmud.com/watersmart, we have schedules for irrigation, we have calculators, we have a really great chart which breaks down, depending on the type of landscaping you have and the type of, irrigation system you have, how often you need to water. And we are asking folks to be very careful about things like avoiding runoff and overspray. So if you see that picture in the top right-hand corner, that is my nemesis. You can see all that water running onto the pavement. That pavement is not going to grow. It doesn't matter how often you water it. So we ask folks to really be careful about that. And if you really are motivated, one great idea to save water is to get rid of your lawn. And you can see this picture in the lower right-hand corner. That's someone who took advantage of our landscape rebate program. We actually will pay you on a per square foot basis to get rid of your turf. And then we also have rebates for efficient irrigation equipment, things like putting in a conversion to a drip system, getting a smart controller, putting in like a pressure regulator so you don't have this kind of like misting and overspray you see in that picture. Next slide, please. And in light of the drought last year, we actually offered some additional incentives through our lawn rebate program. So normally our lawn rebate program offers 75 cents per square foot, but because of the drought, we launched what we're calling our super rebate. So we're offering double the dollars per square foot, $1.50 per square foot of turf replaced for projects that incorporate these additional sustainability best practices, things like sheet mulching, using compost, planting native plants, planting in the cool season. Those are all things that help, retain moisture and ensure that in the long term, you're going to be using less water. We also launched a new rebate program for medians. You can see this picture here, those little strips of turf between the sidewalk and the street. Those are really difficult to irrigate efficiently. So again, we're offering $1.50 per square foot to get rid of those. And that's perfect for cities, HOAs, commercial properties that have those facilities. And in addition to irrigating, we are asking folks to find and fix leaks. So if we could go to the next slide, I would like to introduce you to The Usual Suspects. Hopefully a few folks out there have seen that movie and remember that movie. It was a really great movie. But The Usual Suspects. So these are the most common sources of leaks in your home. You can see here a toilet. We find a lot of toilets that have leaking flappers. Oftentimes you can have faucets that drip. Sometimes it's just a matter of a gasket that needs to be tightened. Shower heads that drip or are inefficient. And then that last picture there is a broken sprinkler head. We see a lot of issues with irrigation equipment, particularly, if things are old, if they're exposed to the sun, they get brittle. Sometimes those sprinkler heads actually get mowed over and then they break. And so then you can have issues with, just anytime your irrigation system is on, you've just got water running out. So in the next slide, we'll talk a little bit about how you can actually check for leaks. And we have a bunch of tools to help you with that. First of all, we recommend that you sign up for our web portal, ebmud.com/mywaterinfo. If you sign up for that web portal, it gives you access to a whole bunch of tools. You can track your consumption. You can sign up for leak alerts and high use notifications. And then you can also receive bi-monthly water reports that kind of show you how your water use compares to other folks with similar size houses and lots. We also are offering a flow meter rebate. These are sort of consumer end product devices that you can install yourself that will give you real-time information on your water use. So like the one that's being installed in this picture is one that's actually magnetic. It basically sort of, reads as the dial on the water meter is moving, the flow meter kind of reads that. And then you have an app on your phone or tablet or computer that gets information. So it's great for things like setting up water budgets, asking for leak alerts. It's a really great tool for tracking your water use. Next slide, please. And then last, but by no means least, we are asking people to be mindful about their indoor water use. California has very stringent water efficiency guidelines for things like appliances and fixtures. So most homes generally are pretty efficient, but we have found that, even still, there's a lot of ways that collectively we can take small actions to save water. For example, the statistic we like to cite is that if everybody in the East Bay cut their shower by 1 minute, collectively as a community, we could save 2 million gallons a day. So those small actions really do add up. You can also do things like run full loads in the dishwasher and clothes washer. Think about scraping dishes into the green waste bin instead of pre-rinsing or putting things down the garbage disposal, because a lot of times people use a lot of water for that. Dishwashers are more efficient than washing by hand. And if you were interested in just, checking your home for leaks, checking your home for efficiency, particularly if you have an older home, you can go to ebmud.com/store and you can order a home water survey kit. So that shows up in an envelope. It's a nice booklet that sort of walks you through the process of, checking your home. It'll introduce you to your meter. It'll walk you through the process of, checking your toilets for leaks. Oh, you probably can't see that. It includes a bag to check your fixtures flow rate, and it includes some dye tabs to test your toilet for leaks. So we really encourage you, especially if you're somebody who, thinks you're already doing everything you can, but you want to just make sure, definitely check out a home water survey kit. And it has a little form at the back that you can fill out and send back to us. And we'll send you free devices if you need them. Things like, aerators for your faucet, shower heads, that kind of thing. And so with that, I'm gonna hand things over to Mike, but I do want to encourage you to visit our website if you have any questions. ebmud.com/watersmart is where we have a lot of information about our conservation programs and rebates. Feel free to, if you have any questions, send us a note. We always love hearing from customers.
Thank you, Alice. And thank you all for joining us this evening. I'm going to talk about the other part of our drought management program and our response to the current drought. And that is, what is EBMUD doing to bring in additional water supplies to help meet the shortage? And I'm starting with a slide here on the Freeport Regional Water Project, which was a major effort, decades in the works with EBMUD, ultimately completing that project in 2011. And I think, as Roberto mentioned earlier, what the Freeport Regional Water Project does is allows us to divert water from the Sacramento River to supplement the water supplies we have available from the Macaumie River and from our local sources. So this is a way we can really diversify and access other watersheds in order to respond to drought and meet our customers' water supply needs. So the Freeport Regional Water Project was a partnership project with Sacramento County. It cost EBMUD alone, our share of it was over $500 million. And what it does is allows us to access water under a Central Valley Project contract that we have, which is a federal water contract that allows us to access water that is stored in Folsom Reservoir on the American River. So unfortunately, the Central Valley Project system is experiencing extreme shortages this year, to the point where they're unable to meet their contract obligations to customers like EBMUD, to contractors like EBMUD, and therefore it's unlikely that EBMUD will be able to obtain any water supplies from the CVP this year. We are, however, able to add additional water supplies through water transfers that we've been working on for a long time, that allow us to work with certain parties in the state that have water available. And through the purchase of that water, we're actually creating opportunities for additional flows in some of the rivers prior to diverting that water at Freeport. So in addition to getting a water supply benefit for EBMUD, we're providing some environmental benefits in some of the rivers that feed into the system upstream of Freeport. Go to the next slide. So who are our water transfer partners in 2022? We have two that we're working with. The first is the Yuba Water Agency, and the Yuba River is located north of Sacramento and feeds into the Sacramento River. And we're in a three-way partnership with EBMUD, Contra Costa Water District, and Yuba Water Agency to procure water this year. We're going to have the ability to obtain up to 10,000 acre feet of water from Yuba in the spring, and another 10,000 acre feet of water this summer. So spring being up until the end of June, and summer being from July onward. The Yuba project does also provide environmental flows in the Yuba River, and that benefit fisheries and local river conditions prior to the water being diverted on the Sacramento River by EBMUD. The second water transfer partner is the Placer County Water Agency. And the Placer County Water Agency is part of something called the Sacramento River Water Forum. And under that agreement, Placer County has agreed to release water for the benefit of the Lower American River, which runs directly through the city of Sacramento. And after that water has served the purpose of benefiting the Lower American River, it's then available for purchase and diversion by East Bay MUD at our Freeport Regional Water Project. That project, that transfer, would produce up to 20,000 acre feet of water this summer. Next slide. So it's East Bay MUD's responsibility to continue to plan for and be prepared for droughts when they occur. And we do that in a number of ways that we've talked about, some of which we've talked about tonight. We have an active water conservation program with a goal of saving 70 million gallons per day by the year of 2050, and we're well on our way to meeting that target. Our recycle water program has a goal of achieving a 20 million gallon per day savings by the year 2040, and recycled water would be reusing water for non-potable purposes, including irrigation or industrial uses, therefore offsetting the need for additional drinking water supplies to be provided to certain customers. We have a groundwater program that's looking at groundwater storage and sustainable groundwater management, the Freeport Regional Water Project that I've already discussed. And we're in the planning stages on working on a partnership project with many Bay Area agencies, including the Contra Costa Water District, to evaluate the potential to enlarge Los Vaqueros Reservoir and store for East Bay MUD up to 30,000 acre feet of additional water that could be accessed during droughts. And that project is expected to be constructed, if it moves forward, and complete by 2030. And then finally, we work very closely with our other regional partners, other water agencies in the Bay Area to build connections between our systems that may allow us to move water from one agency to another in response to specific regional needs. So those all are elements of our resilient long-term water supply and really create our portfolio of options going forward that we may take advantage of in response to drought in the years ahead. And I think, and that's my last slide. Do we have an endpoint, or are we just going to shut off?
Thank you, Mike.
Questions slide.
Yeah, thank you, Mike. So before we get into questions, I like to talk about our next Water Wednesday, which is May 18th at 6 p.m. And it's on Who Built East Bay MUD. So next May, in just 1 year, East Bay MUD will turn 100 years old, our big centennial. And our general manager, Clifford Chan, will be providing a history of East Bay MUD. On the left, you see a photo of Pardee Reservoir being built, and you can definitely count on more cool photos like that in the next presentation. Tune in May 18th at 6 p.m. The link to register will be on ebmud.com/Water Wednesday shortly. Now we're going to move into Q&A. Again, please type your questions in the Q&A box, and I will read them off, and our panelists will answer them. And if we don't answer unable to answer any of your questions tonight, or you have questions you thought of after the presentation is over, you can email us at waterwednesday@ebmud.com, or if it's water conservation specific, you can email it to waterconservation@ebmud.com. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing now. All right, give me a second while I pull up the questions. Okay, great. Okay, the first question we have is, can you speak to the number of gallons per day or gallons per consumption? I think, Alice, can you help us with this one?
Yeah, let me get my camera back on. I can get it to go on. There we go. Yeah, so I think this question is probably in reference to, I talked about that excessive water use penalty ordinance. So I can give you a few sort of numbers to kind of help orient you. So, that excessive use ordinance, the threshold is really set on a billing cycle basis. It works out to be about 1,600 gallons per day. That is a lot of water. Most single family residential customers in our service area use around 200 gallons of water per day. Obviously, it's a little bit more than that in the summer, but you can see that, for most folks, we think it should be pretty easy to avoid that threshold. When we talk about efficient water use in California, one thing EBMUD likes to recommend is if folks want to, try to be as efficient as possible for indoor water use, that's around 45 gallons per person per day. If you want to be super efficient, that's like 35 gallons per person per day. But again, that's for indoor use. We know that, when we talk about irrigation, folks tend to use a lot more.
All right, I think I'm going to move on to the next question. Thank you, Alice. What if you are watering to produce your food? Obviously, farmers use water to grow food. Sounds like another Alice question.
Sure. So, we're certainly not discouraging folks if they have little, gardens at home. I mean, I have a few raised beds at home. I like my homegrown tomatoes. Again, the water use restrictions that we're talking about should be sufficient for that. EBMUD doesn't really have a lot of agriculture in our service area. So that's not so much of a concern for us. I know that, throughout California, obviously it's been a difficult year for farmers, and I know a lot of irrigation districts and farmers have had, water restrictions as well.
That's great. Looks like this question looks like you probably have answered it. If you have anything to add on, it's what about agricultural and industrial water use? That's 80% of water usage in California. Residential savings are literally up in the bucket.
Yeah, absolutely. So, that's absolutely right on that industrial and agricultural use are significant in California. But for us at EBMUD, our water supply comes from the Macaumie watershed. Most of our customers, we mostly supply water for residential. We do have some, industrial and commercial customers as well, who we do a lot of work with to improve their efficiency. As Mike mentioned, we have a recycle water program that, provides water for like refineries, golf courses, parks, that kind of thing. One thing I always like to remind folks of is, we always think of, California as one big state, but a lot of water agencies, we have separate water systems. Our water comes from a very specific place. And here in the East Bay, as Roberto was saying, our water comes from the Macaumie River watershed. So, when we're conserving water, we are actually directly benefiting that particular watershed and all the species and habitat that reside there.
Okay, great. See, our next question is, excellent webinar. Thank you, Mark. It encourages us to be good citizens. What could be the worst case scenario for how much we need to save versus 2020? I'm not sure if I understand that question. Maybe Mark, can you kind of clarify what you're asking, and then we'll get back to that. Well, let's see. How much is 10 to 20,000 acre feet of water? Roberto or Mike can answer that for us.
Are you talking about, just for clarification, supplemental water that we may purchase from others to supplement our water supply? If that is the question, it depends really, and Mike step in anytime, but it depends really where the source is. If it's through our federal contract that we have with the Central Valley Project, through the Central Valley Project with the United States Bureau of Reclamation, that's roughly $120, $130 per acre foot. So at 10,000 acre foot, that's 1.3 million roughly, and 20,000 would be double that. If we're talking about transfer water that we may need to purchase that is not CVP water, that could be anywhere $600, $1,000, $1,200 per acre foot. So those costs increase 10 times at times if the water is scarce like it is this time. So, right now we are looking at spending about 40,000, 30 to 40,000. I'm sorry, 30 to 40 million dollars on transfer water that we are looking at purchasing from our partners, as Mike mentioned earlier. So once we move away from our CVP contract, it gets very expensive per acre.
If I can add just a bit on that, I'm not sure if they were asking for dollars or volumes, but for context, an acre foot of water is enough water to cover 1 acre by a foot. So imagine a football field with a foot of water on it. That's roughly an acre foot. And 20,000 acre feet of water is approximately 10% of the East Bay MUD demand in a normal year. We're going to cut back from that. So 20,000 this year would be a larger percentage, maybe something like 15% of our total water supply.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to combine some questions here because I think Alex can answer both of these at once. What is the base year from which the 10% reduction in water use is to take place? And also another question is the 1,646 gallons a day calculated per paying period, per billing period?
Yeah, those are great questions. Thanks for asking. So to clarify, our baseline for that district-wide 10% reduction is 2020. And I saw there was some questions about that in the chat. And the reason for that is we were in a drought last year. So we were already last year asking our customers to conserve. So as an agency, when we set these sort of drought, goals for water use reduction, we tend to want to compare it to a pre-drought period. So for us, that's 2020. In terms of the excessive use penalty ordinance, the threshold is based on the billing period. For the vast majority of East Bay MUD's customers, that's 2 months. And so it works out to be, we usually measure on your bill in units, which is hundreds of cubic feet. So that's 66 units or 66 units a month, or 132 units for that 2-month period. And that works out to be roughly 1,646 gallons per day. So I hope that helps. It's on a per billing period basis.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I think, yeah, someone else did ask, why is the initial threshold set so high at 1,646 gallons per month? So that's actually for 2 months because it's per billing cycle.
Yeah, and just to respond to that, I mean, it is high. Again, we are looking for the really excessive water use here. That threshold does drop down. If we go to a stage 3 or a stage 4 drought, that threshold does lower. Also, again, when we think about this ordinance, our goal is really not to penalize people. I mean, I would love to not have anybody violating the ordinance. That's why we're going to be doing a lot of outreach to those high using customers to try to get them to bring their water use down. Because again, the goal is really to just cut that really excessive high water use.
Okay. So how many minutes for a shower are we recommending?
I'm so glad you asked that question. We are recommending 5-minute showers. Last year, we ran a bunch of ads on Pandora where we had a 5-minute shower song playlist where we were recommending people pick a favorite song that lasts about 5 minutes, and you can listen to that and use that to time your shower. So find a song that you love that's about 5 minutes, and start your day off right.
And I think we actually have a playlist on our website.
Yeah,
right?
I think we did. We came up with the ads on Pandora, and we were really trying to highlight Bay Area artists. And we're very lucky that here in the Bay Area we have tons of artists and musicians that we could choose from.
Let's see. Audrey commented the recycled water goal seems really small. Mike, do you have a response for that?
Sure. So our recycled water goal was established by our board through a long-term water supply planning process we call Water Supply Management Program 2040. It was intended to achieve water supply reliability out to the year 2040, look at demands from all over our system, and also look at our recycled water program. And there are many considerations when we talk about how much water we want to bring in from what sources. And if you look at the costs of some of these supplies, like recycled water, they tend to be a little bit more expensive than other supplies. So it's really a balance for the board to want to have a diversified portfolio that considers conservation, recycled water, water transfers, groundwater storage, and other programs to meet our long-term water supply reliability goals. And so therefore we came up with a goal of 20 million gallons by 2040. And we're about halfway there right now. We're achieving about 9 million gallons per day. And we have a combination of different recycled water programs. Some are for irrigation, some are for industrial use. And what's interesting is that in 2 of the locations, we've actually run out of wastewater at those locations. We would grow those programs larger if we had more wastewater available to treat. And then in another location, we have lots of wastewater, but we have less non-potable demand. We don't have as many irrigation customers without extensive pipelines in place to reach out further into our system to provide that water. So there are a lot of things to consider in our recycled water program. And our current goal of 20 million gallons per day is actually one of the more aggressive in the Bay Area and in the state.
Thank you, Mike. I'm going to combine these 2 questions because they seem to be in line. I am a San Ramon resident. The state is making us at 5,111 homes here. How are you dealing with this housing crisis? And another question that's related is, what other water sources East Bay might consider to use to account for extra demand mandated by population growth? Who would like to take this one?
I can start on this one. So, but I think this is really what's important to point out is that our customers continue to be more and more efficient with their water use over time. And we've seen, dramatic growth in our service area over many decades without seeing a tremendous increase in our overall water demand. So we're able to continue to meet our customers' needs with close to the same amount of water, even though our population has been increasing. And that will continue to be the case. The other point I would make is that when you consider adding additional homes in many of these areas, these are going to be result in greater densities. And so increasing density in an area that's already developed, while it increases the number of people, doesn't necessarily mean large increases in water use, because what results is it means there's less irrigation, outdoor irrigation, and more water put into indoor uses. And Alice, I don't know if you want to expand on any of what I just said.
Yeah, I mean, I think the other thing that I can mention is, East Bay MUD does what we call a demand study every 10 years, where we kind of, look at the projection of, what we think our demand is going to be out in the future. We're not a land use planning agency, so we work with all the cities and counties in our service area. So we go to them and we ask them, to share information with us about their general plans and what their projections for growth are out to the future. So as Mike said, we do that plan to, look out. The last time we did that was going out to the year 2050. But, we do feel like we have a plan to, meet that growth through things like increases in conservation, increases in recycled water, and some of those supplemental supplies that Mike was talking about.
Thank you, Alice and Mike. How much water does a shower use per minute?
Yeah, so it depends how efficient it is. The standard in California right now, which I believe is the most stringent in the nation, is 1.8 gallons per minute. A lot of older shower heads might use more than that. So if you, just another plug for our home water survey kit, if you order this and complete it, if you find that your shower is using more than that, you can send us the form. We'll actually send you this little aerator. A shower head that you can install that's 1.8 gallons per minute.
Okay, thank you, Alice. Let's see, someone asked, I see you're recording this broadcast. Is there a way to get today's program to show others? Yes, we are recording it, and we will be posting it at our website at ebmud.com/Water Wednesday. It should be up end of this week, and also we'll put it on our YouTube channel at EBMUD. Mhm. And let's see, is East Bay Mud involved with hydroelectric power production? If so, how will the power be affected by continuing drought? That's something we're familiar with?
I can answer that if unless Roberto wants to, but to answer that question, yes, East Bay Mud with its dams on the Macaumie River does produce hydroelectric power. And it will absolutely be affected by the drought. Power generation is really the lowest priority for East Bay Mud. Our higher priorities include, of course, water supply, water in the river for fish to benefit habitat, and recreation purposes, etc. So if there's extra water, we take advantage of that and can do some hydroelectric generation. But in a year like this, there will be much less generation available because most of the water that we generate power with is simply just not there. So there will be some generation because as we release water from our dams for fish in the river, we can generate power off of it before it goes down the river. So there's a little bit of that, but there will be less hydropower generation this year because of the drought.
Mhm. Thank you, Mike. I'm going to combine these two also because they're on the same subject. I would love to see better rebates for installing Greywater reuse system. $50 for a valve is so little. Do you have contractors that do this at a reduced rate? And the other question is there financial help for individuals for setting up a Greywater system?
Yeah, thank you. So thank you for your comment. So just a little bit of background, Greywater is different from the recycled water Mike was talking about. Recycled water is water that, it comes to our wastewater treatment plant, we treat it and it goes to uses. Greywater is when people set up systems in their house to catch, relatively clean sources of water that could be reused mostly for irrigation. The most common of those is what's called a laundry to landscape program. So that's where, you have your washer, you put a little diverter so that when there's like a rinse water coming out of the washer, that water will actually go outside and irrigate. We do offer a rebate for the diverter that's part of that laundry to landscape program. And it is $50, as I think that person mentioned. And I'll put a link in the chat to the part of our webpage that talks about Greywater rebates and also has a whole bunch of other information. We rebate that because laundry to landscape programs systems are the only ones that don't require a separate permit right now in California. So they're a lot easier to do, a lot safer to do. There are some more complicated projects where people might use water from like sinks or showers or that kind of thing. That does require a permit. There tends to be a little more operation and maintenance involved. So we're not currently rebating that. But we do have but we do have this Greywater, rebate program. So I'll share some information about that. I think the person had asked as well about contractors. I'm not aware of any contractors that do these Greywater projects. But if I'll share it in the links. There are a number of organizations like Greywater Action and some other nonprofits that really work to promote these programs. They have a lot of information on how to do it yourself, or they might also have information about contractors that do that work.
Thank you, Alice. So the next question. My understanding is that the agriculture users are not even required to monitor and report on their use. Is that correct, and why?
The California water rights system is very complex. Most agricultural users do report on their use. There are a few exceptions to that, including those that have their own, in some places, their own groundwater wells, although with current laws, that will be changing as well, and groundwater users will have to report as well. There is something also called very senior water rights that are very old, have a very high seniority, and were actually from diversions prior to 1914. Some of those rights have different reporting requirements than others, but for the most part, agricultural users should be reporting their water use.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Let's see. What about water parks? What are there any restrictions on water parks?
Yeah, I'm not 100% sure if we actually have any water parks in our East Bay Mud service area. That's a good question. But we do, we do have a number of restrictions, as I mentioned, related to irrigation, for a water park. Yeah, I'm not sure that we have any in our service area, but we do a lot of work with like parks and recreation areas and like cities that have like community centers that have pools and that kind of thing. We certainly at this stage in the drought, we don't want people to stop, enjoying recreation, swimming, that kind of thing. We just want to make sure that's being efficient. So we tend to do a lot of work with, folks that have pools to like, check for leaks. If it's a situation where they can cover the pool to prevent evaporation when it's not in use, great. And then certainly we do a lot of work with like parks, schools, that have athletic fields, golf courses, to make sure that they're being as efficient as possible in their irrigation. But I don't know that we have any water parks in our service area.
Well, how about splash parks? I'm thinking.
Yeah,
I have
splash
one-
parks. Yeah, well, I think that would be, because I know I live in El Cerrito and I know we have one associated with our, community center and pool there. So again, similar to like a pool or something like that, we would want to just make sure that they were maintaining the system well, checking for leaks. Again, we, at this stage of the drought, we don't want people to, stop enjoying those recreation activities, especially, if it gets hot this summer.
Mhm. Thank you. Let's see. How does East Bay Med presume household size, as some households might contain multi-generations and not a family of 4 or a single occupant?
Yeah, so that's a great question. We would love to, have more of that kind of information, because that helps us with our programming and such. And that is I think, maybe that question's coming up in relation to the Excessive Use Penalty Ordinance. Again, most in our service area, most folks in our service area we've found are using around 55 gallons per person per day indoor. So even if you had a very large family, even if you had, like 10 people living in a house, that's still only 550 gallons of water per day, which would still leave you a lot of room for like irrigation and things like that. So I don't think even if, somebody has a large household, that they necessarily need to be worried about, violating the excessive use ordinance. So I hope that helps.
Thank you. Let's see. Marin was working to cut a deal with East Bay Med, the city of Richmond, and others to wheel water to them. Of course, after having revamped a pipeline across the San Rafael Bridge. What is the status and exposure to East Bay Med?
Yes, last year in 2021, Marin was facing some extreme shortages and was interested in pursuing a pipeline across the Richmond San Rafael Bridge and connecting to East Bay Mud system. Through those discussions, our board established a set of principles that Marin would need to meet in order for us to help them move water. And I won't go through the whole list, but some of the key principles were that the water would not come from East Bay Mud sources. Marin would have to find its own water. It would not impact East Bay Mud customers in terms of water quality or any financial impact. And that, excuse me, that specifically Marin would work with the Richmond community to address concerns of the city of Richmond before any moving of water would occur. Those were the principles that were established in December. And of course, December was very wet, and it turns out wet enough in Marin that in January, Marin Municipal Water District notified us that they were not in immediate need of the project and that they were going to take a longer term effort to do some planning about whether and how to proceed with that project or another project in its place. So Marin is now in the middle of its planning process. We do not know whether or not they may prefer to continue with a pipeline connection to East Bay Mud or some other way to meet their water supply needs, but we are continuing to communicate with them on that.
Thank you, Mike. Let's see. This one we hear a lot. I walk the neighborhood and I'm constantly seeing overwatering. I see people watering within 48 hours, I think of rain. They didn't put that in there. Where can I report it?
You can report it to East Bay Mud. Yeah, so we actually have a program where we do investigate water waste. I want to say that in like 99% of the cases, it's just a matter of outreach and education and just letting the customer know what they're doing. Most people don't want to waste water, but you can either call or email us, or, and I'll put this again in the chat. If you go to our website, ebmud.com/report water waste, there's like a web form you can fill out where you can, provide information. You can even like email photos to us, and we will investigate it and reach out to those customers.
Thank you, Alice. Let's see, this one is from our Super Saver. Assume for a moment that another below average precipitation season awaits us, and that harsher restrictions become necessary for residential households. Will EBMUD be prepared to offer a baseline or lifeline exemption to protect those of us who have been practicing conservation without interruption for years? The customer is part of a 2-adult on 0 children household that averages 50 gallons per day.
Yeah, I can speak to that. So again, when I talk about, right now, when we talk about like a 10% reduction, that is a district-wide goal. So again, if you're being really efficient, keep up the great work. We're not necessarily asking you to do anything more. I do want to say, in the past, I think it was in the drought in 2008, we did have restrictions that were by customer. And in that case, we did have a program where if people, were using less than a certain amount of water, they were exempt from those restrictions. But what we're doing right now, again, is just really focusing on, sort of behaviors and trying to make sure that as a community, we're meeting our goals, because we do know that, there are some folks who are already really efficient. And then we do know that there are some folks who probably could do a little bit more. So for now, we're not asking for sort of 10% reductions at the individual customer level. It's really a district-wide level.
Okay, great. We have less than 5 minutes, so we'll answer a couple more questions. This one is 7 to 8 units per billing period, high or low. Alice, can you talk about what average customer is, and just kind of explain kind of the units of water per billing to our customers?
Yeah. Oh, so I'll have to do the calculation real quick. But yeah, average customers, single family residential customers in EBMUD service area on average use around 200 gallons per household per day. Right. And that includes both indoor and outdoor use. During the summer, and that's averaged over the year. So during the summer, it will be obviously higher because folks are using more for irrigation. If folks aren't using a lot of water for irrigation, we talk about indoor residential use that somewhere between 35 and 55 is pretty efficient. I don't remember it off the top of my head, the conversion. Okay, so one, let's see, cubic foot. I'm doing this on the fly. So maybe the best thing, Laura, I can just look up because I apologize, I don't remember off the top of my head. It's been a long day. I can just put this in the chat, what the conversion is, when we say 1, unit of water, what that means in terms of gallons. Maybe that would be easier.
Yeah, and to everyone, if we didn't answer your question, you can always email it to us at waterwednesday@ebmud.com. Let's see, I think we're going to do one last question. We have 2 minutes left, and I want to respect everyone's time. Let's see. I want to just pick some from the chat because I was trying to capture all of them. See, this may be beyond the scope of EBMUD. Does California have new desalination projects coming?
The answer is that, first of all, there are a few desalination projects in place already up and down the state. The largest desalination project is seawater desalination in Carlsbad, where the options for other sources of supply are more limited, and they've turned to desalination, which is much more energy intensive and expensive overall, but is a viable alternative if you have limited options. So desalination will continue to be an option for the state, but it's really reflects, what other options are available from a cost perspective, from an energy use perspective, and when your options are limited, desalination looks more and more attractive.
Thank you, Mike. Well, we are at 7 o'clock. Again, I like to respect everyone's time. I want to thank everyone for coming to our Water Wednesday speaker series tonight. And sorry we couldn't get to everyone's questions. Please email waterwednesday@ebmud.com if we didn't get a chance to answer your question, and water conservation at East Bay Mud if you have conservation specific questions. Thank you for being here. Have a good night.